Hey everyone, and welcome to the Ask Reaching Ahead Show, episode 12. And on today's show, we're going to talk about protein and how to maximize your recovery.
My name is Lauren Early, and I am a former 6-time World Irish Dance Champion who is now devoted to helping every dancer achieve big dreams of their own. On each episode, we will bring you the best questions to help you discover and unlock your full potential so that you can benefit in every possible way. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Okay guys, so welcome back to the show. So just following on from last week's theme where we were discussing nutrition for the first time on the podcast and show, and also really we went into detail around fueling your performance and how to just maximize your energy levels in terms of training and the days of rest in between training. Now I want to follow on from that, and we've really had a lot of questions come through just all the time every month, generally around nutrition. We plucked one out from quite recently, which is regarding a little bit of nutrition advice around recovery and protein in between training. And so now is a really good time following on from the last episode to really talk about, okay, well, now we know how to fuel our performance, and carbohydrates are responsible for the fueling process, but what is actually responsible for the recovery process? And so this leads us on to protein, okay? So the quick question that we had was from a girl called Joanne, and Joanne basically asked, "Hi Lauren, I'm constantly sore from dancing and I'm wondering what types of foods I should eat to help me recover properly. Any of your help would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, Joanne." Okay, Joanne. So I know for a lot of dancers, you will be wondering what muscle soreness is, how to improve that, why you get sore after training, and just generally what foods are the best types of foods for that. I know a lot of people assume that fueling your performance is really the same thing as fueling your recovery, but in fact they're two completely different things, okay? Now, just like we discussed last week that we were saying about carbohydrates are basically the main energy source of the body. So they're pretty much your gas in your car, right? Now, if we imagine what protein is, then protein is essentially the building blocks of a house. So if we look at carbohydrates, we could define carbohydrates as being the actual builders who are building your house. So they are the energy, right? They're the man-made energy. They're the people that are actually putting the bricks on top of one another. So then if we look at protein, protein is essentially the brick, okay? Because protein is the building block of the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is protein, okay? And so when we eat protein, we're essentially fueling the regeneration and the repair of broken down muscle tissue. Now, protein will be responsible for a whole host of things like skin and nail and all the cells in the body and all of this sort of stuff. But to keep it simple, today we obviously just want to keep it very specific to performance in terms of dancing. And so when we talk about protein as dancers or athletes, essentially what we're looking to get out of protein is the regeneration and repair of broken down muscle tissue. So first of all, if you ask, well, what is broken down muscle tissue? How do you actually create broken down muscle tissue? It's just simply through training, right? So any of the soreness that you get after training or the next day from training or 24 hours after training is going to be from broken down muscle tissue. And essentially what this is just little micro tears in the muscle fibers. And this is, you're essentially tearing the muscle, right? And that's the pain and the soreness sensation that you feel the next day. Now, in order to that muscle to then repair itself and build back stronger, you're going to need a supply of protein, okay, or amino acids. But for today, we'll just use the word protein. Now, in order for the body to do that recovery job properly, it needs an ongoing, continuous flow of amino acids and protein in the bloodstream, okay? Now, one of the biggest issues that you must understand about protein then is that it cannot be stored. Well, first of all, let's look at what protein, the sources of protein actually are, right? So, in other words, if something swims, flies, or it runs, essentially it's protein. So you're looking at obviously all of your poultry, your beef, anything that flies, anything that's in the sea, any kind of animal is going to be a main source of protein, okay? Now you have complete sources of protein, and then you'll have incomplete sources of protein. And for any vegetarians out there, they're generally more aware of what incomplete sources of protein are versus complete sources of protein. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show, but I want to get the main details done first. So they're your sources of protein: eggs, fish, meat, beef, poultry, all of those sorts of things. The main animals that either run, swim, or fly, okay? Now, we know that those types of foods are going to help us repair broken down muscle tissue. And we know as dancers, you're going to be breaking down muscle tissue every time you train, okay? Now, when you won't break down muscle tissue is essentially when the body starts adapting to what you're trying to do, okay? And that's why you must continually overload your training, and you must try different things. You must change your training, and you must have different set targets throughout the year, different types of training to get to that goal, because your body constantly needs overloaded. If I was to lift a 10 kg dumbbell for my bicep every single day, and I wasn't used to lifting that 10 kg dumbbell, for the first week or so, my biceps are probably going to be sore, because I'm going to be creating a lot of muscle damage via the stress that I'm putting on the muscle with that weight. Now, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 1 year later, if I'm still lifting that same weight, my body will have adapted to it. It doesn't mean it's easy. It just means your body has adapted to that loading. So you're not going to have as much damage in the muscle, right? Now, you all know if you stop dancing, and bear in mind, you're all on a break right now. When you go back to dancing, you know that you'll dance the same as what you done 1 month ago. And 1 month ago, you were probably doing 4 or 5 days per week. You'll go back to dancing on day one after 1 month off, and you're going to wake up so sore. And you weren't sore doing the same workout or the same type of dancing 1 month ago, doing 5 of them in a week. But because you have stopped, when you go back and do one, you're going to wake up really sore. Now, what happens when you do 2, 3, 4, 5 of them is you don't just get as sore because there's not as much muscle damage, okay? Because the body has to adapt. It doesn't want to be stressed. It doesn't want these muscle micro tears to occur. But when they do occur, and we want them to occur because that's the whole process of getting better and stronger and faster and more powerful, is that we need to make sure that we have enough protein to recover properly. If you have 2 or 3 sessions back to back on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, it is your job to make sure that you're recovered going into that next session. If you're not recovered going into that next session, you'll still be able to do it. You'll still be able to complete the session, but you're just not going to get as much out of it because the body isn't able to recover properly in order for you to bounce back even stronger. So 9 times out of 10, when people have issues with actually progression and they're not progressing, but they're still trying really, really hard in each session, it's generally due to some sort of nutrition issue or sleep issue or whatever. And that also brings us back onto protein. Now, protein cannot be stored for use. So if you look at, when we mention the word protein, people freak out a little bit, right? Because they automatically think of bodybuilders and people that are massive and all these sorts of things. Eating protein does not give you muscle. If it was that simple, there would be so many people that are walking around huge naturally, and it just doesn't happen. Okay, so you need to, first of all, when you hear the word protein, you need to disassociate the word protein with bodybuilders, because yes, bodybuilders will use it a lot, but that's because they're doing so much muscle damage all the time. Okay, you as a dancer or an athlete, it's not your goal to be huge, but it's never going to happen anyway unless you physically were to train for that, and even to do that naturally is almost impossible. So for us, protein is just a method of repairing the muscle tissue that we already have. Okay, now it cannot be stored for use at a later point. So again, if we refer back to the bodybuilders, they will eat protein with every meal all day. So they'll probably eat 5, 6, or 7 times per day, and they're going to have a source of protein with every meal. This is because they want to be in a state of repair 24/7. Now, if we look at the diet, especially in the Western world diet, we probably only eat protein once per day. I know whenever I do a lot of dancers' food diaries, we'll eat protein with 1 main meal per day, and it's generally with dinner, okay? I know when I was growing up, it was exactly the same. My parents would have fed me a main source of protein, like chicken or whatever, with dinner, but then the rest of the day would have been very, very sparse. So largely our diets are made up of mostly carbohydrate-based foods. But we know from the last podcast and show that you can store carbohydrates for use at a later point, okay? So having them in your diet at every meal isn't really a requirement. But protein, on the other hand, you cannot store. So for example, if I was to right now decide to eat 20 chicken breasts, right? I would only be able to use what I would normally be able to use in any one sitting, and the body would have to digest and get rid of the rest. So it's not possible, just like body fat is a storage of carbohydrates. If we eat too much, the body is able to store it as carbohydrates. Your body finds it very, very hard to store a lot of protein. There is no storage mechanism for it, essentially. and it's very, very hard to be used as energy. It's also a very poor form of energy, and it's best used for its main role of just repair and regeneration. Now, of course, protein is still calories, and of course, it's still possible to put on weight and so on. But ultimately, your body really only needs it for those jobs of repair and regeneration, and it will always want to store excess carbohydrates and fuel. So when we look at protein from an athlete's perspective, we want to make sure that you have enough protein in your diet that's spread essentially out throughout the day, okay? Because that means that your body is able to recover 24 hours per day. Now, if we look at your food diary, and if you think right now while you're listening or watching this, how much protein or what sources of meat do you have in your diet throughout the day? And I'm talking real meat. I'm not talking like you happen to have a little bit of ham and a bit of bread that you bought out of a shop that's only sitting at the front of the sandwich and there's not even at the back of the sandwich. I'm talking about a proper source of protein. Now, if you look at how much of those you have per day, if you only have one, let's say you have it at dinner time. Now, you're having protein there for, let's say, 7 p.m. So your recovery process is ongoing 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. What happens when your body digests that food is that it's going to be looking for more amino acids throughout the night. Now, if you're not eating protein, then we go full circle 24 hours to your next dinner time, then your body's not able to recover 24 hours per day because it's not getting an ongoing supply of protein, okay? Now, this doesn't mean that everybody needs to run out and eat, again, 20 chicken breasts per day, but you must understand the process of, if you're an athlete, you're constantly breaking down muscle tissue, and you must there make sure that you're recovering in time for your next session, and you're giving your body every opportunity possible to bounce back before you go into your next session, before you do further muscle damage, okay? And when I say muscle damage, I'm not talking about getting injured. I'm just talking about that's the process of what we do when we're training, and that's where the soreness comes from. So it's a poor form of energy. It is essential for survival, so it's impossible to live without protein. You cannot survive. It is possible to live without carbohydrates, like we discussed last week, but it's not possible to live without protein. So that's how essential protein actually is. Now, here's an interesting fact. In the absence of protein, your body will break down muscle mass. So it feeds on itself. And a really good example of this is if you look at a marathon runner, okay? Or someone that is on a severely restricted diet, or someone that just undereats protein all the time, is that their body will be very low in muscle mass, okay? Again, a lot of vegetarians, if they're not really clued in on how to maximize their protein intake on a vegan or vegetarian diet, they again will lack a lot of strength and muscle mass because muscle is protein. So in the absence of protein, actual foods that you're giving your body will break itself down, and therefore it will degenerate itself. Now, your body is always either in a state of regeneration, as in it's building itself up, or degeneration, as in it's breaking itself down. So we must make sure as athletes and dancers that you're always in a state of regeneration, meaning your body has enough nutrients and protein to be able to go through the recovery process 24 hours a day, okay? So if you look at a marathon runner, because they're doing so much aerobic volume, their body essentially breaks itself down to feed on itself, because it goes, okay, you're not asking me to do a lot of strenuous activity, you're asking me to do a lot of aerobic activity, which I don't need a lot of muscle mass for. So in order to make myself lighter, to make the process of running easier, I'm going to shed off some muscle mass. And so it gets rid of the muscle mass, it breaks itself down in order to last for longer. So we must make sure then as athletes that degeneration process doesn't happen. We do not want any muscle wastage. We want to keep and repair as much as possible, okay? So if we look at your food diaries, and we go through this in the academy and the nutrition section on phase 2, everyone will do a food diary, and we all sit and analyze at what point do we eat a main source of protein throughout the day. Now, again, it's always around dinner time. So as a dancer, how do we then improve your recovery? So if we look at Joanne's question, we're really questioning, how do you stop being sore all the time? Now, muscle soreness it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're extremely sore all the time and your body isn't then adapting to it, like I discussed a few minutes ago, then there's an issue with that, okay? Your body's always breaking itself down. If you're struggling to build any sort of strength or power, or you're a vegetarian, we need to look at different ways of how to maximize your recovery. Obviously, the natural answer is going to be just to add more protein in, right? But we need to look at what how much protein do we actually need in our diet, and don't really want to go into a lot of specifics as in how much grams and so on. But what you need to know is that you're going to need a lot more protein than what the average person needs. Now, I'm not even talking about the fact that you're still young and everything. We'll discuss that in a second. But let's say, for example, I mean, the national guidelines here in the UK are around 55 to 60 grams of protein per day for a female, all right? Now, that's just as a female. That's your average female. And even at that is still quite low. But that's your average female that is not training. Could be sitting at a desk all day in an office, okay? So you got to then consider the fact that you're also going to be younger. You're going to be training 4, 5, 6 days per week, 2, 3 hours at a time. You're also going to be breaking down so much more muscle tissue than what they are. You're in a speed and power-based sport, so you're going to require a lot more strength and power and exertion than a lot of other people will. And so these factors all come into play. So when you take the average guideline, we're of course going to need more than that, okay? Now, if I have... So let's say we were to increase that like 75 grams, 100 grams, whatever it might be. That's like essentially me going to you, okay, here is 75 pound, but you need to go to the shop and you need to buy 150 pounds worth of food out of 75 pound, or 150 pounds worth of protein out of 75 pound. You can't do it because you're asking too much from that one thing. And it's essentially the same as me giving you 50 or 75 grams of protein. I'm going, okay, here's 50 or 75 grams of protein, but you must also grow. So if you take training away, you still have to grow. You still have to grow your hair, nails, skin, all those sorts of things. You still have to grow in height. You still have to develop. And then you're also going to jump in and you're going to do 6 training sessions per week. And you're going to break all that down, which massively increases your requirement for protein. Now, one of the biggest things we see with Irish dancers or dancers in general is that it's a young sport, okay? It's predominantly a young-based sport, which means that if you're eating protein once per day at dinner, and then you're 6 years old, you're 7 years old, you're 8 years old, and then your body obviously has a huge requirement for development, right? So you need a certain amount of protein per day to help you grow to optimal height, develop optimal muscle mass, obviously skin and nail, hair and eyes, and all those things that I keep talking about. So you have a certain amount of protein that you need to set aside for that every day, okay? So let's say you put your 50 pound in the bank every day, you know that that's what you need. And so you're getting that from that one meal per day, plus a little bit throughout the day possibly. So there's your 50 pound in the bank, right? Now, someone then comes along and goes, okay, on top of this, you also need to pay for 6 training sessions per week. So all of a sudden the amount of money that you need in the bank every day increases, but you're not putting any more in because you're still stuck to your 1 meal per day. So all of a sudden you have to go, okay, well, I need to buy 100 pounds worth of food out of 50 pound and I don't have that. What are you going to do? You're going to pay for the most important things first, right? And this is essentially what happens in the body is if you undereat in the protein aspect or anything really, your body's going to use what it has for the most appropriate jobs first, the most important jobs first, right? Now, if you then look at the fact that muscle's an active tissue, body fat is not an active tissue. So it doesn't really take any calories to hold body fat on a human body. It's just sitting there dormant. It's not doing anything. But muscle mass is an active tissue. So your body requires calories just to keep it there and help it function. Now, if you're then under-eating food or under-eating protein, you're under-eating and your body needs more of it to keep itself. In other words, your body breaks itself down and feeds itself. So you're trying to get protein to train, but you're only eating one source of protein per day. Your body is more worried about growing. Your body's more worried about the development of your own system rather than recovering and repairing your muscle tissue. So essentially you're taking away from other important jobs, okay? And this 50 pound or 50 grams of protein has to be spread across so many different jobs, all right? I hope that makes sense. So essentially what you want to do is just put yourself in a position where your body doesn't have to fight over the protein. It doesn't have to break itself down. You don't have to lose muscle tissue in order to feed itself. And you actually just have enough where you can cover off all these jobs, okay? So as a 7 or 8 or 9 or a 12-year-old dancer, you still have to worry about developing as well as 6 sessions per week, as well as, gym class in school, as well as so many other activities running around with your friends and so on. So whilst we can give you the carbohydrates, which is going to give you the energy to do that, as in we can hire the builders to actually play around with the bricks, you still need the actual bricks, right, in order for performance. So we can give you a high carbohydrate diet and you're going to feel like you have so much energy to do things, but you're never measuring daily life, right? You're never measuring what your performance is like when you're running around with your friends. You're never measuring what your performance is like in terms of growth and so on. These things generally aren't noticed. But what you will notice is your performance in an actual sport. So you just need to make sure that you have enough protein where we can actually improve on all these areas and still have enough left where we can keep all the jobs that the body needs to do, okay? So that brings about then, how do we actually get more protein into the diet? I know a lot of younger dancers don't like actually eating protein. It's always going to be a hard thing to add in breakfast and so on. But a really good place to start is always having 3 main sources of protein per day. So if you have an empty plate, and we can obviously start with the protein source, and then we can build the plate around that. That's going to make sure that if you have something at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and everything's around 3 to 3.5 to 4 hours apart, that we're getting a constant flow of protein going in the whole time, okay? It's, if we can get something in before bed or after training, it's even better. Now, we mentioned last week, and we will discuss again about, supplements and protein shakes, and how after training you want to kickstart that recovery process straight away. So straight after training, your body's going to be very deficient in protein, and it needs to start that recovery process immediately. Now, if you're then finishing training and you're going home, you got a 2-hour car ride, then you're getting in and you're doing other things, there's no recovery process happening. Or even worse, you're going home and you're having no protein. You maybe have some Gatorade, you'll go home and you'll have something carbohydrate, but you're not actually having any main source of protein. Then the recovery process is going to be lacking again, okay? Then you're going to go to bed, you're getting no protein right through the night, you're going to wake up and you'll maybe have some cereal, again, little protein, 5 or 6 grams, and so on. So you got to understand that it's imperative that you really, really work this into your diet, that you understand that the carbohydrates are the fuel in the system, and the protein must be the building blocks for what you're trying to get out of it. You're training really hard with the carbohydrates to become better. And the process of becoming better is your body breaking itself down in order to rebuild itself back up even stronger than when it was the day before. Now, if you only do the first part and you forget about the second part, your performance is always going to be skewed. It's not going to be optimal because your recovery is off, okay? Now, if we have a look at vegetarians and vegans, and also the anti-protein people out there that really are against the whole protein thing, ultimately, if we go back to what I said at the start, complete sources of protein and incomplete sources of protein. One of the biggest issues with people that don't really like eating animals, or they don't like eating animal meats, is the fact that they're going to really struggle to get enough protein in for what they need for performance. For daily life, it might be a little bit different because you may need less, but when we're talking about high performance, it's a little bit different. So if you look at what an incomplete source of protein is, if chicken, fish, beef, and all these things are all complete sources of protein, then incomplete sources of protein are going to be things like beans, nuts, seeds, some dairy products, and so on. Now, if my daily protein target, and let's just put a number out there, if my daily protein target was 100 grams per day, well, for me it's a lot more, but let's just use a round number. I need to get 100 grams of protein per day. Now, that's before I look at carbohydrates or anything else. Because nuts are an incomplete source of protein, this means that protein isn't the main ingredient in nuts. So people will say to me, well, can I eat peanut butter? Yes, you can, but let's say, for example, you need to get 100 grams of protein in. To get 100 grams of protein in things like peanut butter, nuts, and beans, it's not the main ingredient. So the carbohydrates or the fats are going to be greater than what the protein intake is. Makes sense? So if I'm eating, for example, a spoonful of peanut butter, there may be 3 or 4 grams of protein. There might also be 11 or 12 grams of fat. So in order for me to get 100 grams of protein, I'm probably going to have to eat 3 times that in fat to get to my target. Makes sense? Same as like if I'm eating beans or lentils or whatever, the carbohydrates are going to be greater because they're a source of carbohydrates. So in order for me to get 100 grams of protein from beans and lentils, I'm going to have to eat 300 or 400 grams of carbohydrates and fiber and everything. So it's always very hard to make up the total number if we're not actually looking at whole sources of protein, because I can eat a chicken breast and we can hit that target because one chicken breast is like 40 grams of protein. Yeah? But and that's it. There's no carbohydrates, no nothing else. But in order for me to hit 40 grams of protein from nuts, you're talking, 120, 140 grams of fat on top of that. So it's not a complete source of protein, meaning it's not the main and only nutrient in that food, okay? So for those of you who are struggling to get protein in, that don't like it, or who are vegan or vegetarian or whatever, we then need to have a look at actually supplementing with protein. Now, supplements are one of those topics, again, because we're in a young-based sport, that when we talk about this in workshops, people kind of freak out a little bit because they automatically always associate protein with bodybuilders because it's always on the tubs of protein, right? You see the word protein, and then all of a sudden you see You see a massive guy or a girl on the tub, but it's just not the case. We all need protein as humans. And so what we need to think about is, okay, can we supplement? Are we getting enough protein in our diet? Yes or no? If not, okay, are we prepared to eat real sources of protein? Or are we prepared to sit and do the calculations? Because, by the way, it is possible as a vegan or a vegetarian to get enough protein in. I'm not saying it's not possible. It just takes a very special person, because you have to sit there and you have to work out the ingredients. You have to work out everything to perfection. And to do that every single day is very, very difficult, okay? Sure, you'll get, vegan-based bodybuilders and vegetarian-based bodybuilders, but that's their job and their dream every day is to achieve that. And so it's so important that they work out the nutrients and all the foods. For us guys, especially in the dance community, it's just not really going to be something that a lot of people are going to do, right? So we just need to make sure that we can try and find a way to get more in. So if you're not going to eat complete sources of protein, and you're not going to sit there and work out your nutrients of every food every day to make sure you hit your target, we would then need to look at supplementation. Now, here's something that's very, very interesting. When we discuss supplementation in workshops, and we then go through things like, well, who's against whey protein, or why are parents and people not allowing kids to have whey protein, they will generally tell us that they don't really allow it, or they're not really sure why they allow it. They just don't think they should. So people aren't actually even sure of the reason. But here's the important thing. It astonishes me how kids aren't allowed to have whey protein, or they're kind of against whey protein. But yet, when we look at baby formula, whey protein is the main ingredient in baby formula, okay? So I don't understand how someone at 6 months old can be having whey protein in the form of baby formula, which is exactly what it is. But then as soon as they are able to do things for themselves at 4, 5, 6, between the ages of 4 till 16, they aren't actually allowed whey protein. Yeah, and we have a shop here in the UK that's exactly the same rules. You're not allowed to buy protein unless you're over 16. But I just don't understand how that can be the case, because we're allowed it when we're first born. And by the way, your digestive system when you're first born is when it's most compromised. That's why we have to eat baby food, right? Because your digestive system just doesn't work properly. Why are we fed milk? What is milk? Chocolate. If you can have a chocolate milkshake, then you can have whey protein. You can have chocolate flavored protein, because whey is just milk. So if you can tolerate milk, you can tolerate whey protein, because it's essentially the same thing. Whey is just a powdered form of milk, right? So if we look at why kids can go in and have chocolate milkshakes, but they can't have a protein shake after training, it just doesn't make sense. It's just a lack of education, which isn't getting the information through to explain what these products actually are. Now, if you can't tolerate milk, which I'm sure a lot of people can't, that's also fine. You have a lot of different types of supplements that you can go for. For example, I will struggle a lot with milk, and so what I will use is vegan or vegetarian-based, plant-based protein powder. So you can use pea protein, you can use rice protein, hemp protein, you can use a blend of all three, and essentially you're able to avoid meat. And we're just extracting the protein from the peas or the rice, and we just make a powdered form of protein out of it, okay? So we can supplement with that. So you can have a rice or a pea protein shake after training, and then you can go on about, you have your dinner before you go to training or when you get back, and you're able to then add 3 sources of protein into your dinner per day, okay? But essentially, it just amazes me how when a child needs protein the most, from the ages of like 4 till 12, and we're still growing and all that height, we're able to completely remove protein from their diet and only maybe have one maximum 2 sources per day. We aren't letting them supplement with it, but yet we're supplementing with protein from birth. For those of you who aren't fed by the mother, you're being supplemented protein from birth, and then all of a sudden when you stop baby formula and you start eating real food, we're not allowed protein anymore until, the digestive system just doesn't work like that. The gut just doesn't pick up that you're 4 years old and you can no longer have protein. And then at 16, all of a sudden your gut can digest whey protein again. It's just not going to happen. So you just got to be looking at, okay, if you can digest milk and you can digest it well, then you can have that. Now, one of the downsides is going to be that if you have a splash of milk and coffee every day, it doesn't essentially mean that you can digest milk. It just means you can digest that little bit every day. So if you go having 3 or 4 protein shakes per day, of course it's a little bit different. You just have to check if you can digest lactose and milk, okay? Now, if you can, you should be able to tolerate whey, but if not, you can move on and have a look at other sources of protein. And that's essentially really it, guys, for protein. We know we need it every day. The other reason why a lot of people will be against protein is because it's generally an acidic based food, and we're in the era where everybody wants this alkaline green based environment. And alkaline is very, very important in the human body. You must stay alkaline because that's essentially where most recovery is going to happen, especially because you're in a lactic acid based sport. So bear in mind, if you're in a sport that produces a lot of lactic acid, your body's going to be very acidic, right? Because you're producing acidity inside the body. So we need to make sure that we have a diet that's very alkaline to clear the acidity out and make sure that the body is in a good process. It's flushing itself out, the toxins are getting out of the body, and you're staying in a good recovered state, and you're helping the liver detox and so on. Now, protein is an acidic based food, so people will avoid that. But so long as you have enough alkaline based foods in your diet, everything will balance out. Yeah, it's not that acidic foods are actually that bad. So long as we can have, the majority of foods that are alkaline on top of it, the body will always balance out that acidic alkaline level in the blood anyway. So you just need to make sure that as a dancer, and you're having 3 sources of protein per day is going to be ideal. Complete sources if you can, and food is always going to be first priority over supplements. But if you can't eat real sources of protein and you can't get enough in via your incomplete sources of protein, you must look to supplements. And if you are supplementing and you can tolerate milk and whey, you can have those. If not, move on to your more vegan, vegetarian based shakes, and make sure that the ideal time for that is going to be after training. And the reason for that is just because it's in powdered format, so it digests very quickly, right? The second you finish dancing, you're probably not going to want to sit down and have 2 chicken breasts because you're just not going to want to sit and eat. And protein takes a little bit longer to digest. Okay, so if we can then have it in the form of a shake, it means that it's in cellular form already. It's already broken down, so it's going to be absorbed very, very fast, which means that your recovery process starts straight away. Okay, guys, so I hope that helps. Next week, we are going to be in LA, so I will try and do a show and podcast from the hotel or from somewhere out there where we're going to be based. We're also going to try and do a big meetup if you are free. I think it's going to be Saturday the 14th. I don't know if I've got that date right, but it's going to be next Saturday. If you're in the LA direction and you're going to be free, let us know. It's only going to be a small group. We're just going to take a small group and we'll maybe go for some food, or we'll go somewhere and sit and we can all talk everything training and nutrition. The last one in Boston was quite a big one, and this one we'll maybe make a little bit smaller so we can get around everybody's questions and actually just add real value on a one-to-one basis. So yeah, that's it, guys. I'll speak to you back here or from LA, hopefully if we can get one done for episode 13.